boardroom was always a place of power, a room where voices echoed in glass and steel and money decided fates. But that morning it was different. The hum of conversation had died, replaced by a silence that seemed to press against the walls. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their glossy shoes tapping lightly against the marble floor. At the head of the table, standing where no one had expected him to be, was a man no one had ever looked at twice. His uniform was a plain gray, the kind worn by people who were expected to stay invisible. His mop leaned quietly against the wall, and his cart still sat outside the door. He had walked into the room of giants with a stack of papers in his hand and something in his eyes that stopped everyone cold. Daniel Carter had never been meant to stand here. He knew it as much as they did. His job was to sweep floors, to scrub away coffee stains from conference tables, to empty trash bins filled with documents that others shredded and forgot about. To most of the people in this building, he was less than a shadow. When they passed him in the halls, they didn't see him. Not really. Sometimes someone would mutter a quick, "Thanks," if he held a door, but more often than not, his presence was as unnoticed as the air itself. But Daniel had learned to live in silence. He was a man who carried his battles quietly. The world had stripped much from him, but it had not broken him. Once, long ago, he had dreamed of being an engineer, a builder of systems, a man who solved problems. Life had given him different cards. His wife had fallen ill, the kind of illness that drains not just savings but hope. He had taken every job he could, anything that would keep the hospital bills at bay. He had scrubbed, lifted, carried, driven, until his back felt like it might snap. He watched her slip away anyway, holding her hand while promising her the only thing he had left to give, that he would protect their daughter, that he would make sure Emma never grew up believing her father had quit on her. That promise was why he worked nights in this skyscraper, pushing a mop while Emma slept at home with her grandmother. That promise was why he smiled at her in the morning, even when his body begged him to collapse. And that promise was why, for years, he had fed his mind with books pulled from the dusty shelves of the city library. Mathematics, finance, economics, computer programming, subjects that had once seemed unreachable, became his secret companions. Each page was another brick in the tower he was trying to build, a tower that might one day lift Emma into a better life. Still, he never imagined that tower would be noticed, until he started hearing whispers. It was late one night, long past when most employees had gone home. The halls smelled faintly of bleach and lemon polish. Daniel was mopping outside the glass-walled conference rooms when voices drifted out. Two executives, arguing in low tones. He wasn't trying to listen, but the words came sharp and clear through the glass. 100 million, one said. Gone. Nobody can find it. Daniel paused, mop in hand. 100 million. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, only kept sweeping. Eyes lowered as though his mind was far away. But his ears caught every syllable. They spoke of auditors, analysts, experts who had combed through the accounts with no answers. They spoke of the CEO's fury, of careers hanging by threads. And then the door opened, the men walked past, and Daniel was left alone with the echo of their panic. That might have been the end of it. Except Daniel had always noticed things other people didn't. He emptied the shredder bins every night, hauling away bags filled with torn paper strips. Most nights it was meaningless. But sometimes, he saw numbers scrawled in the margins of discarded drafts, fragments of financial reports, emails that had been printed and thrown away, little pieces of a puzzle, pieces that other people dismissed. He began to collect them, not in a way that anyone would notice, just mentally at first, storing details in his head. Then, one evening, he slipped a half-shredded page into his pocket and took it home. At his kitchen table, While Emma sat beside him coloring with her crayons, he spread the pieces out like a jigsaw. He traced patterns with his pencil, scribbled notes, followed the trails the way someone might follow footprints in the snow. It became a nightly ritual. Emma would fall asleep on the couch with her stuffed rabbit, and Daniel would sit with coffee gone cold, piecing together the trail. What he found both frightened and electrified him. The money hadn't simply disappeared. It had been hidden, moved through shell accounts and false invoices, siphoned into places that no one had thought to check. The scheme was elegant, almost invisible, but not invisible to him. He could see it clearly, like a crack in a sheet of glass that threatened to shatter the whole window. When the final piece clicked into place, dawn was breaking outside his window. The city skyline glowed faintly gold, and Emma stirred under her blanket. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing on him, but a spark burning in his chest. He had it, the answer to the riddle that had baffled the best minds in the company. For hours he wrestled with himself. What would happen if he brought this forward? Who would believe him, a janitor? Would they laugh him out of the room, fire him for daring to speak? But then he remembered his promise, to fight, to build, to never let Emma down. This was his chance. His one chance to step out of the shadows and be seen. That morning, when the executives gathered for another crisis meeting, Daniel did something nobody expected. He walked into the boardroom, his mop left leaning against the wall, his cart forgotten in the hallway. The moment he crossed the threshold, conversations faltered. He could feel their eyes on him, sharp as blades. A janitor in their room, carrying a stack of papers. It was almost laughable. But Daniel wasn't laughing. He stood at the head of the long, polished table and held their gaze. The CEO, a man with a face that had been on magazine covers, leaned back slowly in his chair, curiosity flickering in his sharp eyes. "Are you telling us," he said, voice measured, "that you cracked $100 million problem while cleaning our floors?" Daniel's grip tightened on the papers. He thought of Emma's sleeping face, of his wife's last words, of the nights alone with nothing but silence and numbers. He met the CEO's stare without flinching. "Yes, sir, and I can prove it." The room was silent, heavy, waiting. Some of the executives looked at him with annoyance, their lips curling as if the very idea was insulting. Others leaned forward, unable to hide their curiosity. Daniel laid the papers on the table, spreading them with steady hands. He spoke, and the room listened. His voice was calm, deliberate. He traced the flow of money, pointed to overlooked details, explained how accounts had been siphoned into shells overseas. Each word chipped away at their disbelief. Murmurs began to ripple around the table. Eyes darted to screens and papers as they followed his trail. By the time he finished, the CEO's face had drained of color. The janitor had done what no one else could. And as Daniel straightened, his heart pounding, he knew something had shifted in that room. The air was charged, every person holding their breath. What came next would change his life forever. The air in the boardroom felt like it had been drained from the building. Daniel stood with his papers spread across the long mahogany table, every line of data pointing like an arrow to a truth that nobody had dared to imagine. The silence stretched on, heavy enough to crush a lesser man. He could hear the faint hum of the central air, the ticking of an expensive watch on the wrist of an executive who sat nearest to him. No one spoke, no one moved. They all stared at him, as though their eyes could burn through his uniform and remind him what he was supposed to be, a janitor, a man without a seat in this room. And then the CEO leaned forward. His chair creaked, leather stretching under his weight. His eyes, cold and sharp, pinned Daniel like a hawk sizing up its prey. "This," he said slowly, his hand brushing over the papers, "is either the boldest stunt I've ever seen, or the most brilliant act of loyalty this company has witnessed in decades. A few executives shifted in their seats. One of them, a finance director with sleek glasses and a tight jawline, scoffed audibly. "With respect, sir, we're really going to waste our time entertaining theories from..." He gestured at Daniel with a flick of his manicured hand. "The janitorial staff." His voice was laced with condescension, a tone that had likely silenced countless people before. Daniel felt the weight of every stare, the burn of humiliation threatening to creep up his neck. But he stood firm. He didn't break eye contact with the CEO. "It's not a theory," he said, his voice quiet but unwavering. "It's fact, and you know it." The CEO tilted his head, studying him. Something unreadable passed across his face, part calculation, part intrigue. Then he snapped his fingers. "Get me the head of accounting. Now." His command jolted the room into motion. One of the assistants rushed out, heels clicking on the polished floor. While they waited, whispers erupted around the table. Some tried to dismiss Daniel, muttering about protocol and credibility. Others, quieter but sharper, admitted that the numbers lined up too cleanly to ignore. Daniel heard every word, but he kept his eyes forward, refusing to shrink. He thought of Emma, of her little voice asking him before bed, "Daddy, when will we have our own house again?" He thought of the way she believed in him without question. He couldn't let himself falter now. Minutes later, the head of accounting, a stout man with thinning hair and sweat already dotting his forehead, walked into the room carrying a laptop. He looked confused when he saw Daniel, but quickly moved to the end of the table where the CEO gestured. "Check this," the CEO ordered, sliding Daniel's papers toward him. Right now, the man adjusted his glasses, scanned the numbers, and began typing furiously. His expression shifted almost immediately, a flicker of alarm flashing across his features. The room leaned in, watching him work. The clatter of keys filled the silence until, finally, he froze. His hands hovered over the keyboard, and he looked up, pale. "He's right," the accountant stammered. "The transfers, the shell accounts. It's all here. It's been here all along. We didn't see it because we weren't looking in the right place." But he turned his wide eyes toward Daniel, disbelief dripping from his voice. He saw it. The murmurs in the room exploded into noise. Executives who had dismissed him a moment ago now argued loudly, voices overlapping in panic and anger. Some demanded to know who was responsible, who inside the company had orchestrated it. Others hissed accusations at the accounting department, at compliance officers, at anyone they could blame. The CEO, however, didn't raise his voice. He sat perfectly still, his fingers steepled under his chin, eyes locked on Daniel. "Everyone out," he said finally, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. The shouting stopped instantly. "Leave the documents. Out. Now." There was hesitation. Nobody wanted to be dismissed like children, but one look at the CEO's face convinced them. Chairs scraped against the floor, shoes shuffled, and within moments the grand boardroom was empty save for two men, the janitor and the billionaire. For the first time, Daniel felt his pulse quicken. It was one thing to face a room full of skeptics. It was another to stand alone under the gaze of the man who held the power to either crush him or change his life forever. The CEO leaned back, folding his arms. "So tell me, Mr. Carter, why did you do it?" Daniel swallowed. "Because it was the truth. Because this company, your company, was being robbed in plain sight. And because I couldn't stand by and watch it happen." The CEO raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect in return? A medal? A promotion? Money?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't expect anything. I needed someone to see that I'm more than the uniform I wear." His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied it. "I made a promise to my daughter, that I would give her a better life. And this was my chance to be more than invisible. The CEO studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different, heavier. Then, to Daniel's shock, the man leaned forward and let out a low laugh. It wasn't mocking. It was something darker, sharper. You have no idea the storm you've just unleashed, do you? Daniel's brow furrowed. What do you mean? The CEO stood, walking slowly around the table, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. You exposed a theft of $100 million. That's not the kind of secret people let go of easily. Someone inside this company orchestrated it, and they've been careful, very careful, to hide it. Now you've dragged it into the light. Do you think they'll thank you for that? No. They'll come for you. They'll try to bury you. Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't thought of it in those terms, hadn't considered the danger that came with holding such knowledge. He had only thought of solving the puzzle, of proving himself. But then the CEO stopped walking and turned to face him directly. The question is, do you want me to protect you, or do you want to stand alone? Daniel hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of Emma again, her small hands gripping his, her absolute faith in him. I don't want power. I don't want wealth. I just want a chance to build a life for my daughter. That's all. The CEO studied him a moment longer before nodding once, as if making a decision. Then you'll get it. But understand this, what you've done today will change everything. For you, for me, for this company. There are people who will want your silence, and others who will want to use you. You've stepped into a world far bigger than you realize. Daniel felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The enormity of it all crashed over him. He was just a man with a mop, a man who had spent years trying to keep his head down and survive. But now he had become something else entirely. The CEO placed a hand on the papers, his expression hard. I'll convene an emergency investigation. Heads will roll. And when they do, I'll make sure yours is not among them. His eyes softened, just slightly. You've done something extraordinary, Daniel. Don't ever think otherwise. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Something like hope, fragile but real. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing: the janitor who had walked into the boardroom was not the same man who would walk out. And yet, even as relief flickered through him, he caught a shadow in the CEO's gaze. A shadow that whispered this was only the beginning.